Bonjour à tous, désolé pour ce petit retard. Bienvenue au 20e Café Expo. Hi everyone, today is going to be bilingual, English and French. Today is joining me Phil, CEO from Mocha. Just a couple of brief introduction for everyone. On va parler principalement en anglais aujourd'hui, Phil est anglophone. C'est la première fois que nous faisons un café en anglais et en français. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à les poser en anglais ou en français. Ça me fera plaisir de les traduire pour Phil. Aujourd'hui, il y a à peu près 70 inscrits. Our last two shows recorded and over 120 replay. So the show and the Cafe Expo will be available on replay on our new YouTube channel. So feel free to watch it again or to share it with everyone you feel it would be relevant for them. Donc, notre interview va durer 30 minutes avec Phil en anglais. On va avoir une 10 minutes de période des questions et puis on va conclure pour garder notre 45 minutes. Encore une fois, désolé pour le délai de 5 minutes. C'est la première fois que ça nous arrive en 20 épisodes, mais il fallait que ça arrive à un moment. Je vais remercier bien évidemment le Développement économique Canada et le gouvernement du Québec qui supportent l'ensemble de nos activités à l'international à la Chambre de commerce du Montréal métropolitain. Et bien sûr, EDC qui commandite ce Café Export. Sans plus attendre, without further ado, I will ask Phil to join me and we can start the interview right away.
Hello, Thibault.
Good morning, Phil. How are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
Great, great. Good morning. So, Phil, you're CEO of Mocha. I start all my interview as such. Tell us about Mocha, what you do, where you are internationally. Couple intro.
Absolutely. So, as Thibault mentioned, my name is Philip Barra. I'm the founder and CEO of Mocha. I started Mocha back in 2015 to help Canadians start saving and investing their money and ultimately achieving their financial goals. Back when I was doing my customer discovery in the early stages of the business, I found that 1 in 2 Canadian millennials had less than $1,000 in the bank account, regardless of how much money they were making. So we created an app to help them save more, spend less, and invest smarter. We launched the app back in 2017 and quickly became Canada's #1 saving and investing application. Most recently in Canada, we've launched a new Mocha 360 product that allows you to find more money in your everyday life through bill negotiation, access to the financial advisor, and debt management. And we recently launched in Europe, which I'm really excited to be talking to you guys today about. So we launched in July of 2020, and we are currently operational in France.
Sounds great. I have plenty of questions for you. First, before going into details about your expansion plan and why you choose France amongst all the other countries, we mentioned before from our discussion that you're a US citizen, you're American. You launched your startup in Canada, in Montreal. So why that decision?
Absolutely. So I was originally born and raised in the US. I'm currently in the US right now as well. But I love Montreal and I thought it was a great place to launch a startup, primarily because Montreal has a fantastic startup ecosystem. So if you think about it, Canada is a large enough market to be able to build some really awesome and innovative products like we've seen here in the Canadian market, but it's also small enough and has a lot of great government support through programs like these and different innovation grants and shred credits to be able to go and help entrepreneurs launch their business and solidify their business. So it's a great launching pad and testing ground for building innovation. What I like to think is I brought my American dream big attitude to a Canadian, let's build something with solid fundamentals and metrics and build a profitable business and then export that globally. So I think I'm taking the best of both worlds and launching that in one of the best places in the world to live.
That sounds great. So would you say that there's a bit less incentive or support to launch startup in the US than in Canada?
So both the US and Canada has its pros and cons, but I have to say that Canada fosters innovation. So between the different government incentives, which are much greater in the Canadian ecosystem than it is in the US ecosystem, the collaboration, you see Fintech founders or even founders who are competing against each other, collaborating and helping each other kind of this idea that all tides rise, all boats, and this idea that there's a lot of great collaboration associated with that. So between great government resources, the ecosystem, the government grants, access to fantastic talent, Montreal has and Toronto has a lot of fantastic universities and people graduating, so a lot of fantastic talent there. I have to say it's a great place to launch a headquarters.
Yeah, it sounds very good to hear that from someone from the south, to be honest. And it's a good news for Montreal that's want to grow is ecosystem, startup ecosystem. So you're kind of an odd character because you're born and raised in the US. So your startup started in Canada, and now you're launching in France rather than in the US. So are you angry against the US? Basically, why did you choose France?
Well, ultimately, I'm trying to build the best business that I can for my shareholders and for my users, right? One of the things that I had access to as an American citizen when I was bootstrapping my first two businesses, essentially I went from being a broke student to a bootstrapped entrepreneur, and I have become really good with personal finance management. I had access to a whole bunch of tools that my peers in Canada didn't have access to. So ultimately, when I sold my second business back in 2015, I said I wanted to build a platform that allowed me to take all my personal finance skills that I learned and the things that I was already doing for my peer group and my friends and family, and be able to put that into a product that allows them the opportunity to be able to make that more available, widespread, essentially democratizing access to fantastic technologies that help you with your financial lives. In the US, there's a lot of competition and there's a lot of great products and innovation, but the focus exclusively on the US, which is absolutely fantastic. But if you look at Canada, and you look at Mocha as a product overall, we are a first mover in a local market with a fast follower proven technology. If we look at Europe, we can do exactly the same thing. The competition is fairly low. There's an access to the user base is very similar to our user base, and there's a need for financial products and services. So if I can serve this market, why not be the first mover in that local market, be able to make a splash? Eventually, I'll go to the US, and it will be a great thing. We'll have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars before I enter the US and really compete against some of the incumbents that are in that space. And meanwhile, I'm going to build a fantastic business in countries like Canada and Europe and France. And so I'm really excited about that piece.
Sounds great. You're working in a very regulated market, and we know France is amongst the toughest regulated market in Europe. So why France amongst all the other markets in Europe?
That's also a fantastic question. So when I first took a look at international expansion, we knew we wanted to move out of the Canadian market. And there's a specific window of which it makes sense for a company. You can't go too early, because if you go too early, then you're diverting resources about winning in your local market, and that's difficult to be able to do. So if you go too early, you distract yourself, and you could have a failure in two markets rather than a success in one market to be able to make that happen. If you go too late, then you're now solidified in one market, and you've built an organization that can't or would have to require major change management to be able to get to a point where you could actually go and adapt your business model to other markets and have operations that run. So there's really a finite window of when that makes sense, and it's different for every business. But for us, we wanted to open ourselves up to financing from a global platform rather than just a Canadian platform. So we had received about 30% of the market share here in Canada for the robo-advisory space. We knew that we were excited about launching a global business, and the time was right for us to go. Now we're a little bit on the early side, but we were ready to go. So when we think about what are the things that we need to when we go international, you need access to a user base that's similar to your user base. You need access to an infrastructure where the product functions and works. So if you think about Africa, it would have been very difficult for us to launch there. There's a lot of great fintech innovation happening, but they went from a cash society to a mobile society, and they skipped the banking infrastructure that we're used to here. So for us to be able to launch a product would have required us to completely reimagine our entire solution. And I don't think it would have been adaptable to that market. And you think about some of the other markets, you have time differences and changes that you have to be able to do and to be able to dive into. So we really liked Europe, because Europe is twice the size of the US market when you think about it completely. It's a very fragmented market from a cultural perspective, but we're from Montreal. That's what we do. It's in our DNA. We've been multilingual since day one. So it's a barrier to entry, but one that we're willing to tackle. And it has the infrastructure, the payment networks that we need, the investing infrastructure that we needed to be able to operate. So we said Europe is the next place for us to tackle. tackle. We can passport our regulatory side of our business through every single European country. Now we have to choose. Germany actually ranked higher than France for us, but because of the fact that we're tackling not only launching our product in a new market, but also understanding the cultural components of a new market, a lot of our team was from France. All of our product managers were from France, had moved to Montreal. Half of our engineering team was from France as well. Our CTO at the time was from France. So we knew the France market really well. So we had an advantage in that local market that we decided to capitalize on. So that being said, we've built infrastructure. We're live and operational in France. We're ready to passport to the rest of Europe.
That sounds great. I mean, I like the fact that you were strong. You were thinking that you needed to be strong enough to move internationally, but flexible enough to move your organization somewhere rather than be a big corporate. That's a great point of view. And I like the fact that you integrate the culture part in your decision making. I mean, I'm doing a lot of training regarding exportation, and that's always my talk. Like, take into account culture because it's not easy to deal with. And definitely German culture, it's a stretch from Quebec culture. I would say French culture is a bit closer, and especially since you have a lot of people from both culture in Montreal. So great to hear. A quick question regarding your product. You said that you looking at adaptability to a new market and whether it's possible or not. So you not copy paste your product everywhere in the world. You adapt it to the local market, right? How do you do that? How do you fine tune that?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, two components. If you think about the top-down approach or the bottom-up approach, the top-down approach is say, I want to take my product and I want to put it in a new market and I don't want to change anything. The bottom-up approach would be, I'm building a brand new product for the local market. We wanted to go somewhere in between. So we took the top-down approach and said, what can we do to minimize the amount of customization that we need to do for our product and be able to make it relevant for a local market? And then once we did that, we said, okay, what type of customization and localization do we need to do to be able to make it a success? So we're not going in blind and saying our product, the way it works in Canada is absolutely going to work the way it needs to in France. We're also saying we're going to take the learnings and the innovation and the 3 years of operations history and be able to apply those learnings into a new market to be able to succeed, right? So we actually have a competitive advantage against maybe a startup who's starting for the very first time, because we've gone through 3 years of basic learnings that you can go through, and we're able to apply those learnings into a new market as we build the product. So we're somewhere in between where we take our product, we bring it to another market, and then we customize and localize it to the point that makes it successful to be able to best manage that piece. So that requires strong product management, but also requires strong marketing localization. So our comms is more important than I think the product experience itself. We have a product experience that's ubiquitous and works across all markets. Now, if you had a ride sharing application where you didn't have a large population of drivers to be able to do that, it just wouldn't work, right? So sometimes you're looking at a double-sided marketplace, you can't take that model, but for us, there's a need to save and invest regardless of saving and investing cultures around the world. So we have a really strong product from that point of view. So as we think about it, it was really how do we get the right marketing communication and branding to be able to match the aspirations that we need to for that piece. We hired a local marketing agency in France to help us with the rebrand that we went through and ultimately building the new way of communicating with customers as we go and try to attract new customers over there.
Before I'm moving to the marketing part, because I have a quick question on it.
Yeah.
So you were saying that you launched recently in France. Did you add test phases before launching the official product, or did you launch that product in mind that it could change slightly because of the user experience? How did you manage that?
So yeah, we didn't test we did UX testing, we did all the things that we needed to with like boots on the ground, but the very earliest stage was we had an assumption that our core value proposition resonates with users in that local market. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to understand what was the variance in cost to acquire between the Canadian market and the France market. Essentially, our signups funnel is about 3 stages. You have your personal information, you have your bank linking, you have your investment questions that you need to sign up for through that. what we did is we replicated the first phase of our sign-up process. We built a landing page. We started running Facebook ads and got people through that part of the funnel, so we could be able to determine what that cost to acquire of stage one was. Then we went back to our Canadian data and said we're going to take an assumption that our Canadian and France sign-up funnels will be similar in terms of a product experience. We're able to tease out, based off those conversion rates, what a cost to acquire would be in France. So we actually came in a bit under, and always there's local early adopters and advantages to be able to do that. But really that marketing testing and the cost to acquire is the piece that we tested most at the beginning.
Oh, that sounds great. So you managed to activate your community or early users before launching, just to make sure you have the right funnel and spread quite significantly at your launch, right?
Essentially, we had a waiting list that was larger than our biggest competitor in the local market within a short period of time. So we were pretty excited about the user numbers we were able to attract based off that value prop and what we're looking to do. Now, it was a waiting list versus actual users, so that was when the launch came into effect. But I'm happy to say that we've had a lot of great success in the local market.
Sounds great. So back to the marketing part, you were mentioning that you did a rebranding. You switched to Milo to Mocha. So was it, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask naively, but was it part of your international strategy to change that branding to be more international? You answer that way.
Absolutely. So we had a brand that resonated really well in the Canadian market and we're really excited about. But as we take a look at launching in the European markets and then additional markets that we're excited about Latin America, we're excited about the US and certain Asian markets, there's definitely a need for us to build a brand that was ready to scale. So in the early days, we built a brand that was great for the Canadian market, but as we went to launch it in Europe and think about what does the future of that look like, we had a brand that was really strong for international.
So how do you come up with Mocha? What's the story about that?
That's a great question. So we went through a strong rebrand and naming process to be able to go through that. Included customer feedback, working with a design agency and everything else. But there's always a strong narrative behind the names. And I think it's important for us to resonate with Milo. It came from Milo Croton, a guy who used to live 500 BC and used to carry a calf up a hill every single day. And the small repetitive task of carrying a calf up a hill meant he was the strongest man in the village to this small repetitive daily task. So we really wanted to carry your financial burden for you. With Mocha, we're not going for a coffee brand, but there's this concept or this advice that essentially a myth that millennials have that if you skip your morning coffee or avocado toast, you'll become a millionaire. And I think we've all lived through the pandemic. We've all skipped the morning coffees and all that piece. And none of us are millionaires through that. So it's this idea that you can live your life and spend on the things that you want, but also be financially responsible at the same time. And Mocha allows you to be able to achieve that part of your business. So a lot of great brainstorming of names and going through different aspects. We wanted to be multilingual. We wanted to be easy to pronounce, easy to remember. Domain names that we're able to handle, no trademark infringements, but ultimately have a core meaning at the end of what are we trying to achieve.
So a lot of work behind that branding.
A little bit of work, you know, the things that you do between 5 and 9 on the
obviously. So I know you did a very global analysis before launching internationally. How do you manage that process? How do you came down to one market, which is France? Did you how does that global analysis came down to one market, and what was your methodology, process, and thinking in that?
Absolutely. We had a fantastic international expansion matrix that we had gone through globally, and we had done things like time difference and operational efficiencies. If we were operating off of a 12-hour time difference, it would be almost impossible for us to coordinate, at least at this stage of the business, to be able to. direct flights, what does the competitive market look like in those local markets, what was the banking infrastructure like, the fintech adoption rates, so just really market readiness, market feasibility and operations piece. So we did a global analysis on that scale. And then to take it to the next level, if you think about a business like Mocha, which essentially is a wealth management platform that allows you to be able to facilitate your daily savings, we need access to data aggregation. So that was one of the core pieces. We needed access to banking infrastructure similar to what we had, with access to payment rails like ACH and EFT in Canada. In Europe is SEPA direct debit. Then we needed regulatory infrastructure that allows us to do fractionalized trading and accessible trading. So with those three things, we're looking at how do we go and build our product to be replicatable in a local market. So it's kind of a two-phase piece. What was the global analysis and customer readiness, and the second piece was from a kind of product point of view, how do we build the product to be able to match the local markets?
That sounds great indeed. Did you have, we heard a lot of thing about France that's very regulated, very difficult administratively. What's your take on that? How hard was it to launch in France? Because you are in a very regulated market, in a market that's administratively is a nightmare, potentially. So how do you manage that?
I think
to sleep, by the way.
I think we like barriers to entry, because if there's a barrier to entry, those are things that we excel at that potentially competitors don't. So as we take a look at any type of regulated business, there's potentially, if you look at 1,000 pages of law, that there's one sentence in that 1,000 pages of law that allows you to build a business that's innovative and ability to go out and do the right things. It's like a concept of taking a mutual fund and stripping out all the horrible fees that people have and be able to use it for something that's really innovative, and thinking about it. How do you reimagine something based within the regulatory rules that's just really smart and clever, that's perfectly legal and above board, but people are like, oh, I should have thought of it that way. Good for them for thinking about that piece. So we like to excel on a regulated front. We work very closely with the regulators. We sit on advisory boards with the regulators. We advise on open banking and some of the concepts that are happening in those local markets. And we just love to build strong businesses that require a lot of smart thinking. And it's something we're not scared of tackling. So no, it's not easy, but yes, it gives us a moat at the end of the day.
It's a good thinking that if you go through the barrier, your competitors will have to do the same. So you have an edge if you go early on the market. So I like the thinking. So.
And quickly to add on that piece before you go to the next question, most people ask, are you upset or aggravated by regulators? Sometimes they'll add 6 months to your launch process before you can do anything, or you have to jump through hoops. But ultimately, the regulators are there to protect the consumers, right? If the regulators weren't there to go and protect the consumers, there would be fintech platforms or other types of platforms that would have emerged that potentially could have harmed users overall. And I think that's a negative thing, because if there were platforms that could have harmed the users, and the fintech industry would have lost trust overall. And I think it's a really important thing to note. Yes, regulators add friction for companies starting their business, and when you have limited funds, it makes it more difficult. But ultimately, if they weren't there, you may not have been able to start your company at all, because no one would trust a fintech solution. And ultimately, that's what they're there for. So I'm actually quite happy about the ways that regulators play a role to be able to build that fintech trust with consumers. And that's why we're seeing in fintech in 2019, 1 out of 2 Canadians actually used a fintech product, which is fantastic, because that's up from 18% back in 2017. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and it's a very good point you make, that regulators are there to protect the end users. So obviously, if you take them off, you have to work with them instead of fighting them, I would say. A quick question regarding you're coming from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, that has kind of a trendy look in France. Did you surf on that to launch, or how did it work? Did you use that at all, or not at all?
Not too much. I think we really tried to adapt to the local market. We didn't come in and say we're the biggest Canadian company coming into France. I think we said we have an awesome product to help the French save and invest their money and be able to utilize it the right way. So again, it's a little bit of surfing that you can do in the beginning days, but it's only going to take you so far. I think if you look at us launching in Spain or Italy or Germany and any of these places, that would be even less relevant. So being able to localize customize your narrative to the local market is extremely important.
So what's next for you? I mean, you're in France right now. What's your roadmap about your international expansion? What's your plan?
So if you think about our path to 100 million annual revenue, it's driven through two main categories. It's driven through your monthly revenue per user growth. So how much money are you collecting per user per month? And that's driven through user adoption and new products. So in Canada, we launched a new Mocha 360 product that's allowing us to increase our monthly revenue per user. On the other end, it's your user growth. We're really excited about the Canadian market. We've done a lot of great things, but for us to hit the 2.5 million users we need to be able to be hitting 100 million annual revenue, we can't do it just in the Canadian market by ourselves. So we think about what do we need to do to be able to layer on new markets, to be able to attract customers and accelerate our user growth to a point that gets us to that velocity that we need without increasing our cost to acquire significantly. So if you think about the fact, if we can layer on 10,000 users sustainably with the same unit economics that we have in the Canadian market per new market, launching new markets will help us increase that velocity to a point that we're onboarding 50,000, 60,000 users a month, which I think would be a fantastic thing for us to be able to do. So for us, user growth and launching new markets within the European infrastructure will be quite exciting. We're hoping to kick up the velocity as soon as we finish our next round of fundraising.
That sounds great. Do you already have a market in mind after France in Europe, or you're still deciding and depending on maybe the pandemic as well play a role in that decision?
So definitely have a couple of markets in mind, but I think what our approach is the first new market is the hardest market you're going to tackle, right? Because you go from one core market to building your operations and your infrastructure for managing two markets. Once you've done two markets, you can do 5. So that piece is pretty easy. I say the same thing to entrepreneurs. Once you can process $1 of payments, you can process $1 million of payments. So for us, getting that first new market was a really important milestone for us. And now that we've built the playbook, and we're building that playbook now to allow us to go and scale to new markets. So we're going to take the feedback and the data and the testing that we're doing, but we have a couple in mind, but we're going to make a data-informed decision once we've had enough time to operate in that local market.
That's actually, especially since you already have the infrastructure for the European Union, it's easier to grow within the European Union. Maybe a quick question regarding the pandemic. I mentioned it before. Is it tough to manage an expansion you just launched in France within that pandemic? How did you manage that? I mean, was it was it tough for you, or how did you manage that basically?
I think the pandemic affected people in different ways, and it was a really important growing step for our company. If you think about the things that we've done in the last 6 months as Mocha, we've launched a new brand, a new market, we've launched a new product while all working remotely, growing a team to about 60 people with offices in 3 countries, and in the middle of a pandemic with changing user behaviors, right? So we've done a lot in the last 6 months, and I'm so proud of the way that the team handled it. Specifically from a logistical point of view, going from a primarily in-person office-based environment to a completely remote environment actually helped us and accelerated our conversations, because our team was now one virtual team rather than 3 offices globally. So it was actually quite a unique way for us to be able to go and put the collaboration hats together to be able to get that product up and out. So I quite actually appreciated us. It was an easy move for us to move virtual because we were all remote ready from day one, and a lot of us worked remote from a day-to-day basis, but this is the first time we came together on a 100% remote environment, and accelerated our communication flows and our collaboration for multi-office collaboration. So I thought it was actually quite nice for us to be able to do.
So do you think of keeping that way of doing business, or do mostly managing people? You want to keep that 100% virtual, almost no offenses?
I'm a big proponent of collaborating and working hands-on. And I think that that's why we had a very office-centric based culture prior to the pandemic. I think I've learned a lot as a leader to be able, how do you manage it the right way and continue building culture and doing the right things to collaborate with a lot of team activities. We do a bi-weekly all hands. I give Fintech insights every other week, my roundup on what's happened in the last 2 weeks. And I field anonymous questions from my entire team, everything about runway to metrics to regulatory and competitive landscape. So I think that's worked out really well, managing through that time period. I'm actually quite excited. We're starting to hire people. We just hired a new VP product in Toronto who's been to Montreal once throughout the entire product, right? So we've hired people in other continents that I've never met before, and I've been very hands-on on the hiring process to date. So I see us building an organization that's going to thrive virtually, but I'm never going to discount the power of an in-person relationship, and figure out how do you have that as a hybrid relationship will be the most important thing that you do moving forward.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable point of view, like having a hybrid. I think most of the businesses now work towards that way, to be a bit more work from home based, but having a place to actually gather together. Did you went in France in the last couple of months, or not at all? Was launching a new company in a market without being able to go in that market? That's very tough.
I had actually come off a plane right before the pandemic really started to take effect. I remember reading articles while I was over and spending a few weeks in Europe prior to that in the beginning of 2020. So I had done a lot of boots on the ground in 2019. Actually, 2017, 2018, 2019, I participated in the Paris Fintech Forum and had a lot of engagement. I was doing multiple trips back and forth to be able to make that happen. But since the beginning of 2020, I haven't actually been there. So we've done a lot of new relationship building directly through Zoom and our ability to meet virtually. So I had a lot of boots on the ground before that piece.
But you have a team in France already, right?
We do. We have a team in France and a team in the Netherlands as well.
Netherlands. Oh, sounds great. You're already expanding.
Absolutely. So we actually decided, so one of the things that we did really well in Canada was we acquired an asset management firm to be able to manage the regulated side of the business and bring people that had a relationship with the regulators and understood the regulatory part well. We ended up doing the same thing over in Europe. We acquired an asset management firm based in the Netherlands to be able to gain those expertise in an accelerated time fashion to be able to make that happen and bring on a team of really qualified people to help us run the business over there. So that was an acquisition we did in 2019.
That sounds great. We kind of are about taking questions from the audience. So I'm just going to quickly look if we have any. No, so far. I'll go with my question though. So just give me a quick minute. Indeed. Well, we mentioned that we mentioned about the rebranding about Mocha, Milo. Milo has that strong branding in Canada, and how did it affect the branding? I mean, changing a branding that's very strong and managing to keep like the awareness and all the baggage you have from the previous branding. How did it affect the Canadian market? How did you manage that?
Yeah, that was something that definitely had a lot of fear and anxiety around what would be the impact of the rebrand now that we've been live in market. We actually had a couple of board members call us and ask us, maybe we shouldn't rebrand so quickly in the Canadian market until we see how the brand works in France. But for us, it was really important to do everything all at once. Imagine managing app stores and reviews are all linked with one developer bundle, having to separate two code bases or put together one code base into two code bases. It just wasn't necessarily operationally feasible for us to do that. So we went for it. We had some trust in that the brand would resonate well because of all the research that we had done. So ultimately, it worked really well. We look at our Facebook ads and our click-through rates on our new ads versus our old ads, and we have click-through rates of 2 to 3 times. So they're 2 to 3 times more effective and resonate 2 to 3 times more than our previous ones did. So that being said, I think it's quite a success story for us.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, well, I'm a user myself. So when I see the rebranding, I was quite surprised, but I was like, okay, fair enough. It's the same product anyway. So if you're happy with the product, that changed pretty much nothing, to be honest. A quick question regarding your expansion within Canada. Did you start Quebec, then province by province, or launch widely on the Canada straight away? How did you manage that? Because there's a lot of question raised right now about expanding in Canada. A lot of companies are looking more internal market rather than external for right now because of the pandemic. It's easier. How do you manage?
That's a great question. And typically, and I'm surprised we haven't touched upon this yet, but we started Mocha on a social mission to help Canadian financial goals. And this idea of inclusivity is really core to our values, not only from a diversity standpoint of view, but from a financial accessibility point of view. Many of us don't think that Canada has an underbanked population, but we have a very strong banking infrastructure, but a lot of people who are not taking full use of that overall banking infrastructure for us. So for myself, it was really important from day one to launch coast to coast to coast. So our product was always operational in both French and English, always accessible from everyone in the local markets. And there are certain markets where the number of users that we have in certain territories are less than the registration costs that it costs us every single year to operate. But it's an investment I'm willing to make, because if you don't have a strong core value of being accessible across the platform, you're only focused on the profit and the bottom line, then you're not going to build a company that's putting its users first. So for me, accessibility across the country from day one was extremely important. And I'm hoping to make that happen globally eventually as well.
That sounds like a nice core values. And it's important to take into account those values while expanding and when growing your business, because otherwise you can lose your track in some way. There's a quick question. I just see the question. That you switched the brand Milo to Mocha. There's a lot of strategic content, research, everything already worked around Milo. How do you transfer that? How do you manage? You start from scratch again? How did you manage that?
So one interesting thing to take a look at is one of our competitors. So I'll take a benchmark of May 2019. In May 2019, a competitor of ours had spent $167 million in the Canadian market to acquire 100,000 users, and Mocha had spent $14 million to acquire 100,000 users in the local market. So we had spent very similar, we had acquired almost identical number of customers for the same type of product in the local market, but someone spent 10 times more than I did to be able to get to that point. So we never heavily invested in brand. We always invested in product, and we always invested in performance to be able to make that happen. And I think that was a core value of the organization. We've been able to achieve 10 times better results because we focus on that 10 times better product that resulted in that than investing in brand and those components. I'm not saying that that's the right strategy for everyone, but it's a strategy that worked well for us. So we had strong brand recognition, but we hadn't invested heavily in brand beyond some of the stuff that myself and my team had done overall. In terms of an SEO perspective, there was a way for us to be able to actually map back all the previous articles with keeping our milo.ai domain name and redirecting it to the mocha.ai domain name. So we don't lose all of those redirects and the content that was written about us. But we had to make a decision. Essentially, as of this point, we're investing in our future rather than capitalizing on our past. And it's a hard decision to be able to make, and it's one that we decided to do. So we didn't completely lose everything, but we said that we have to be comfortable losing everything in order to be able to invest into a complete future.
That sounds great. I have now plenty of questions, but I don't have time to ask you them all. Maybe two last questions, one from the audience, which is, how do you see yourself in 10 years? What's your vision about Mocha in 10 years? What do you take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my vision for Mocha in 10 years is really about how do you automate people to be able to achieve their financial goals and to make that happen. If you're able to delete your banking app off of your phone, and I'll use the Canadian context as an example since we're all here in Canada, but imagine you had an auto loan with TD, a bank account with RBC, a credit card with National Bank, and you had one, and your mortgage with Scotiabank, and you had one platform that allowed you to manage all of those financial products. So you didn't have to go into each individual app to be able to make that happen. Someone that was able to provide you with agnostic financial advice and be able to have one centralized ecosystem. So essentially, you're building your own bank through this one platform without actually being a bank itself. So I think as soon as we can get to that point where people can manage all aspects of their financial life directly with Mocha, that will be a success for us.
Perfect. Thank you for that. It sounds great, actually. I'm looking forward to that. I'm struggling between 3 accounts, so right now it's just a nightmare for me. So well, I'm looking forward to that. Last question before we conclude, and that's a question I ask all the person I have interviewed in the Café Expo. It's what the international represent for you and for your company.
So international represents an opportunity to make an impact in millions of people's lives around the world. For us, again, this idea of financial inclusion and our social mission is really at the core of everything that we do. And it's an extremely important piece for us to be able to manage. So it's an opportunity to build an awesome product, help people do the things that they want to do in life, right? People use money as a way to kind of keep score on what they need to be able to achieve. But ultimately, they don't care about the balance of the bank account. They care about moving out of their parents' house, getting married, having kids, living those life goals, taking that vacation, planning for retirement. And if Mocha can help make your life better in that way, and for people around the world, I'm more than thrilled, and my job will be complete.
That sounds like a great mojo. Thank you, Phil, for your time. Thank you for the interview. I hope I'll see you in France or in Canada soon, since you're in the US right now, and hoping everything is well for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. And it's a pleasure chatting with everyone here. And hopefully I can provide more insight on going international. If anyone has any direct questions, feel free to reach out. We're a small community that's here to do big things in the world, and I'm happy to facilitate that.
Thank you for the offer. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to take that for your work for it. Thank you, Phil. Ça nous amène à la conclusion. We have to conclude today interview. Merci d'avoir attendu ces 5 petites minutes de retard. J'espère que ça aurait valu votre temps et j'en suis sûr. L'interview a été fantastique avec Phil. Les Cafés Export sont bien évidemment disponibles en rediffusion sur notre chaîne YouTube. So you can watch your replay, Café Export, and all of them, all 20 of them on our YouTube channel. Feel free to do so. Et on vous attend dans 2 semaines. Merci à tous et bonne fin de journée.